Welcome back to Second Breakfast and our ongoing coverage of A Game of Thrones, bringing you the best thoughts, theories, and literary analysis. Yeah, well, Ned was finally beheaded. I don't know. I don't want to do a cutesy thing.
You heard it here first. He's dead.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert. I think, is there anybody alive today who doesn't know this plot point?
Well, that's exactly where I want to start.
Oh.
So we're going to talk about Arya 5, which is the chapter where Ned finally dies. This is, I think, the 66th chapter we're talking about of this book, and Ned is finally dead. We've been waiting for it since the beginning. You and I have known that this was going to happen for 10 years since we saw the first season of the HBO show. And I want to try, just for a second, to just acknowledge that this wasn't always a known factor.
Right.
This, like, mission statement of the series.
Right.
We have to kind of go back there. Go back to how this must have felt even before the show. When the book came out, what this must have felt like.
I know. It's so hard to imagine. And I even tried to go back and think about when I first saw the show. And I don't remember, but there's a real possibility that I knew he died. Or I think I knew he didn't last very long in the show or something. Like, I don't even think I properly got the real shock of seeing Ned Stark, of seeing my main character die on screen in the first season. Like, I don't remember that feeling, and it is so hard to imagine. And like, you're reading it, it doesn't feel shocking at all because we're anticipating it, but it had to have been astounding as a first-time reader, especially before the show, and especially before we started subverting everything for the sake of subversion.
And it doesn't feel like that. It doesn't feel cheap. It doesn't feel like a lecture. It's shockwaves through a genre. I still found it affecting this time because we try to get away from things like narrativity or the hero's journey, these expectations where everything falls into the same pattern. But you remember what it was like when Season 8 came out of Game of Thrones. It was a whole series that had been built for 10 years on subversion, and everyone still wanted a clean, satisfying, traditional ending.
Right.
We're not even defending the ending as it is. We can talk about that much later when we get there.
Yeah, sure.
But just for right now, I think this moment is the mission statement for the show, for the series.
Yes.
Of what it's about, and this isn't the type of fantasy you're used to. And I just found this moment still so powerful and affecting, even though I've known it in my bones across more than one medium for a decade.
Sure. Yeah. I like that you call it a mission statement because some of the things I'm going to get into, I think, really encapsulate that. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let me give us a recap of this chapter. Quick reminder that obviously we're spoiling this, but beyond this chapter as well into the books and the show. So this is Arya number 5. Arya is running through the streets of King's Landing and she is catching a pigeon. Remember, Arya, the last time we saw her, she had escaped the castle after everything went down with Robert. And so she's been living pretty rough, basically like cosplaying as a poor person. She hasn't been able to really like escape the city as she originally planned because all the gates are guarded really heavily. And she's heard a lot of rumors going around. She knows that King Robert is definitely dead, but she doesn't know much beyond that. There are rumors that Ned did it. There are rumors that Ned is already dead, that Renly did it. Like nobody knows what's going on, but she knows King Robert is dead. And Arya is, of course, really smart, so she's been really savvy, getting herself food, keeping herself safe, but still, she's living rough. And as she's wandering the streets, the bells start ringing, and it's a summoning bell. And so everybody's being summoned to the Sept of Baelor. And so Arya moves with the crowd and heads there to see what's going on. And up there, she sees Ned, Sansa, King Joffrey, Queen Cersei, Littlefinger, and Varys. And she's like, okay, something is going down. And this is where Ned gives his confession. And Ned, falsely, confesses to plotting to murder King Joffrey and seize the Iron Throne for himself. And he says that Joffrey is the one true king of Westeros. Arya, of course, knows this is not true, but he says it. And so then it falls to Joffrey to decide what to do because Joffrey is king. And Joffrey says to the crowd that Cersei has advised that Ned take the black at the wall and that Sansa has begged for mercy for her father. And then Joffrey drops one of my favorite quotes of all time. But they have the soft hearts of women. So long as I am your king, treason shall never go unpunished. Sir Ilyn, bring me his head. Mm-hmm. And so Sir Ilyn goes up to the platform and Sansa screams and Arya is trying to get up to help save her father. She's got a needle with her. She's like slashing through the crowd. But then a man grabs Arya and forces her to look away just as she hears the sword come down upon Ned's neck. And the man who is holding on to Arya as this all is happening, it's all very chaotic. As this is happening, Arya recognizes that he is Yoren, the Night's Watch brother who came down to see Ned a while back. And he tells Arya that she's a boy now and that she's coming with him. And that's where the chapter ends. It ends very suddenly in a moment of chaos and panic and desperation and sadness. And that's where we leave it.
Yeah, so plot-wise, I think we already sort of started to engage with that before. It's simple, but incredibly powerful, effective. It's about Arya's experience, but it's mostly about wrapping up Ned's arc here. But I think thematically, if to move into the analysis portion of our thoughts, theories, and literary analysis, I was so struck by how many of our overarching theories popped up in this chapter.
Totally.
And I just want to acknowledge them more than I want to explore them, because I think we've exhausted some of them.
Okay.
But this chapter kind of played the hits in a way that you'd want a crescendo moment too. It had seen and unseen. It had Maggie's Bird Corner in triplicate. You had the crows, the gulls, and of course the fat little pigeons. And even the thing we talked about with the sigil embodiments, with these journeys that different characters and families and houses are going on, there's plenty of that there. But the one I really want to play with is something we've been talking about slowly throughout these very sporadic Arya chapters. And we've been talking about her as a ghost.
Right.
It was during the last Arya chapter that I believe we introduced or began development of this theory of the narrative undead.
Yeah, I think we actually started it even earlier, but we definitely talked about it a lot in our last Arya chapter.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just remember that being a big beat in the last Arya chapter.
Yes, yeah, because Syrio calls her dead girl and all that. Yeah, so she's like been part of this weird transitionary state between worlds.
And I feel like we escalated that idea so much in this episode, where when she was being carried by that group of people, where she was stuck in this crowd and kind of buffeted along, almost like her feet weren't touching the ground. She was just like a ghost or an apparition, just kind of floating with this group. It almost reminded me of in the Insidious movies when they go into the supernatural realm, the further.
Yeah.
When everything is foggy and spectral and there are all these ghosts just kind of standing there and milling around.
Oh,
wow. It felt like that to me. It felt liminal.
Yeah, well, there even like when she it sounds like it says she can like hear her father's voice as if from far off. Like there's a lot of stuff like that where she feels like she's not quite there, or she shouts out but no one hears her. Like she's having a lot of these sort of in and out of reality moments.
Yeah,
I like that.
It's kind of a purgatory thing because she is in stasis right now. Everyone else, all the other Stark kids that we're following, they're all marching along the path of their storyline now. Except Arya, because she's trapped in King's Landing. You can tell, I mean, Sansa is too, but she has that whole thing going with Joffrey and Cersei.
Her story's still going, yeah.
But Arya feels like she's on hold here for this chapter, where she's trapped in King's Landing and she's almost anonymous. She's not herself. She's not anyone. People think she looks like a boy, but she doesn't have like a fake name or a fake identity.
No, she's just nobody.
Boy, exactly. And I think that's a beautiful bit of precedent that's being laid for her later character arc, where she will become nobody.
Right.
And then, of course, the blindness and all these different elements that we'll get to there. But this moment of transience, I think, is as powerful as it is as a piece of foreshadowing. I think it's also an insight into what I think between us is going to be the big question of this chapter. And it's almost more of a structural thing than a plot thing. I want to talk about, and I know you do too, the choice to have Ned die in an Arya chapter. Because obviously we had to be there. He's not George R. R. Martin is not the kind of writer who's going to skip over this death.
Yeah, we're not going to hear about it after. We're going to see it happen.
In the same way, someone like Frank Herbert might jump past a massive battle or death and then just tell you about it later. Or jump hundreds of years and tell you about it later.
Sure.
But that's not the posture of this story.
No.
So if we're saying that Ned dying at the end of this book, we did have to see, as readers, we had to have eyes on that event happening. There are three choices. Three options for who it could have been: Sansa, Arya, or Ned himself.
Right.
And I know you have stuff on this, so feel free to jump in. But my beginning analysis here was just that it wouldn't make sense to me if it was Sansa, because she's still kind of a player in this Game of Thrones right now. She doesn't have agency, but she's being used as this pawn and hostage. And I think she's more of an active player than the skeleton of Ned Stark or the unknown anonymous apparition of Arya.
Sure. Okay. Why do you think we didn't do Ned then?
And that's my question. That's the question. Because I was trying to like winnow this down in my notes, and usually I would do that and then just present the theory I came to. But I think the process is important here, because that's the question: is why is it Arya then and not Ned? And I think there are three kind of simple explanations here. One is that it makes his confession more shocking and intriguing.
Right, because we don't get his inner thoughts. We don't see him think, okay, now it's time to decide, am I going to lie?
Right.
Or, we don't see that happen. It just is a shocking thing he says.
And it's still clean because we got the breadcrumbs of him talking to Varys in his last chapter, that ultimatum that chapter ended on.
You get how he got there, but it's still shocking to see it happen because we didn't see him get there. We saw him think about getting there.
But you also see the effect of that confession because Arya is part of the crowd. And I think in general, portraying this event through an Arya chapter gives you a broader perspective on the scene and its effects. I think it also helps the reader to not think that the story's kind of over. Because we've spent so much more time following Ned than anyone else.
That's a good point.
If he died in a Ned chapter, the rest of it might feel like Apocrypha. It might feel unnecessary.
I also think, and this isn't even what my theory is, but just as we're talking, Ned's last chapter did not feel like Ned's last chapter. It felt like we're in the middle of Ned's story. So then it makes Ned's death feel all the more abrupt because we didn't even get a clean last final Ned chapter. We didn't get him thinking about doing this confession. Seeing ice above him as it comes down, hearing Sansa scream, looking out over the crowd. We don't get any clean ending for Ned. It just ends abruptly. So before you even realize it, you've already read your last Ned chapter. You're not going to get another one.
And I do think that is more in line with the posture of the series. It's that rug pull. It's that brutality, that lack of sentimentality and completing a clean arc.
Yeah.
But I think it's also, there's a benefit in not telling this particular chapter from Ned's point of view because you don't have to narrate or depict a death in first person.
Sure, yeah.
Which I feel like, the story has supernatural elements, it has magical elements, it's about to have dragons, but it doesn't have that kind of narrative camera zooming out to talk about the birds flying overhead after Ned died.
The chapter would just end when the sword came down. Like, it would just abruptly end, and which would be interesting. Like, does he do that in the future? What, like, I can't remember, like, who's the Red Wedding? Like, who's the POV in the Red Wedding? It's Catelyn, right?
I imagine it's Catelyn.
So it ends abruptly in that way, but she has to see Robb die first, but still, like, I think you're right that it would feel, what did you say earlier? Like, it would make it feel like the story was ending if we had it on Ned. I think you're right about that. I
think we need deaths to feel slightly indirect in the way we experience them. In the same way, Robert wasn't a POV when he died.
Right.
Viserys wasn't a POV when he died. Jon Arryn, all these people, we see death. I think that's what makes it shocking. It's not the, false experience of a character dying.
Sure.
It's the people on the margins. It's the people being hit by it who have to live in the aftermath of it. I think this whole story is about aftermath more than it is about like firsthand experience.
I think that makes sense.
If you want to jump in here, that's totally fine.
I'll go ahead and tell you. This is so fun. You set this up really well without even realizing it. So I was also thinking about this central question, and I came to a theory based on one of those. You said this chapter plays all the hits of the stuff we've been thinking about, and we're going to do it through that lens. I like that you said, you framed the question as, why do we see Ned's death from Arya's perspective? Well, we don't actually. Arya doesn't actually see Ned die. And I'm going to talk about that and what that might mean. So I'm not going to get too into the seen and unseen thing because we've done it a lot. I did go through and there are about 42 instances of the word see, sight, blind, right? It's really, really, really present here. But I was trying to figure out, okay, so what? Why is it here? What's it doing? And I think the way we can kind of figure this out here is that Arya, through her lessons with Syrio, who is now dead, but through her lessons with Syrio, she has learned to equate seeing with understanding. We see that happen here in this chapter. Even though Syrio is dead, he is in Arya's mind a lot. It seems like his lessons have been how she survived in King's Landing. And we see her when she's looking at sort of looking at a guy selling pies or tarts. She really, really wants one. And she thinks to herself that she remembers
lemon tart?
Yeah.
My latest book, Lemon Tarts
Lemon Tarts in Space. Folks, let's quick pause, quick ad break. Let me tell you about Lemon Tarts in Space. It is a book that Cam read recently. It's rip-roaring right through space and time. It is a light sci-fi dark comedy. Really, Scott's Alien meets Monty Python. It is a delightful time. You can purchase it via the link in the description of this episode. It's available as a novel or as an audio drama. You can listen or read to your heart's content.
I'm so glad we're on the same page.
Thank you very much for supporting the show and supporting Cam's work. And now back to Arya. So she's looking at the guy selling lemon tarts in space and signed copies. And she thinks to herself that she remembers what Syrio had told her about seeing. So she like gets a sense of who this man is, and she thinks about, oh, well, he's got a limp in his left leg, and maybe if I run. She ends up not stealing the pie because she also sees the City Watch guys, and they're like, hey, they're gonna cut your hand off if you steal this. But she uses the power of sight to understand the situation. We see her do it again when she comes across some guardsmen who are wearing Winterfell colors. They're wearing gray and white, and she's like, oh my god, these are my guys. But then she looks at them carefully, and the narration says, look with your eyes, she heard Syrio whisper. Arya looked, and the three gray cloaks were strangers. And so again, she does that seeing thing to understand that these are not her friends and she should not approach them. And so if we take that as sort of, okay, this is Arya's way of understanding the world, seeing equals understanding. What does it then mean that she literally doesn't see Ned die? I think there are a lot of options that we can think about. One is that she doesn't understand why Ned has died, or rather why he confesses when it's clear that she knows the truth and that confession is false. Maybe that's something she doesn't understand. Maybe it's that Arya doesn't believe Ned is dead. Maybe she hopes that he's still alive. She doesn't see it happen. I didn't see a corpse, therefore maybe he survived.
It's hard for kids to process death.
Totally. Especially when it's like, your dad who's supposed to be like this strong,
Who's the chief of staff to the president.
Exactly. Like hard to imagine. Maybe that's it. Maybe it's more that Arya has yet to figure out. There's more to the story and she has not yet figured it out. Because when she's looking up on the platform, wherever they are, Littlefinger is there, Varys is there. There's something about Ned's death that Arya doesn't understand because she doesn't see it. I think there are enough clues in the text to tell us that Arya doesn't fully understand Ned's death. And of course she doesn't. She's 9. But by having Arya, this character who is incredibly observant, sees more than anybody else does, at least in the vicinity, this person who can navigate the dark, who is spying from above on the ramparts and stuff, if she is not fully understanding Ned's death, then that tells us that on the broader scale, there is more to the story. And I want to sort of break that down a bit further through a quote from Syrio Forel from the last Arya chapter, Arya 4, which was a while ago.
Was he alive in that last chapter?
Yes, that was the chapter where she had like kind of her last lesson with Syrio. Then the Lannisters came in and they said, hey, your dad wants to see you. And Syrio goes, why did he send you all? Why didn't he come himself? And then they all kill Syrio and Arya runs away. And that's when she escapes. So one of the last things that Syrio says to Arya is this line. He says, opening your eyes is all that is needing. The heart lies and the head plays tricks with us, but the eyes see true. So if we think about Arya compared to our other POV characters, right? You said our other options here are Sansa and Ned. I think that quote from Syrio perfectly explains why we can't have Sansa and Ned as our POV characters. I'll start with Sansa. I think Sansa's tie here is the line, the heart lies. Sansa is fully guided by her heart. She's in love with Joffrey, and she believes
maybe less so now.
Well, yes. But when she comes onto the scene
this is their first fight.
Yeah, right. Aw, their first fight when he kills her dad. But when Sansa comes onto the scene, Arya sees that Sansa is smiling, and Arya's thinking to herself, why the fuck is Sansa smiling right now? Yeah. But Sansa looks happy. She has asked Joffrey for mercy. Because of her heart, because she's in love with Joffrey, she believes that Joffrey is going to spare her father. Of course, that does not happen. So the heart has lied to Sansa. The other half of that line is the head plays tricks with us. And I think we can tie that to Ned. in our last chapter with Ned, which we knew, but most readers would not know is the last Ned chapter.
I don't think I knew at the time.
Yeah, right. It really comes as a shock. Ned has been trying to outsmart the Lannisters this whole time, but even in the last chapter, he's trying to outsmart Varys. He's trying to figure out, where do Varys' loyalties lie? Why is Varys talking to him? And even at the end of the chapter, Larys asks Ned to ponder and spare a thought. So to think, to use your brain. The line again is, the head plays tricks with us. Ned has been trying to outsmart the Lannisters, trying to beat the system, trying to figure out the truth behind Jon Arryn and all of that. And that has led him astray. And that is why he is also not fully seeing the situation, and therefore he's not understanding.
He's also, just to jump in, he's also kind of been in this liminal space of being in this sensory deprivation chamber in the dungeon.
Absolutely.
Where he doesn't know how much time is passing. He's kind of communing with some dead people and friends in that last chapter.
Right.
So his mind is also more literally playing tricks on him.
Exactly. Yeah. And so again, the line is, the heart lies, Sansa, and the head plays tricks with us, Ned. The rest of it is, but the eyes see true. Ooh. And that is what Arya is doing, because Arya can literally see the whole scene laid out in front of her. She can see Ned, she can see Sansa, but she can also see all the other players in this game. She can see Joffrey, Cersei, Varys, Littlefinger. She sees and clocks and notes all of them. And so she can, not only can she see the full thing, she also has this understanding. She knows that Sansa is wrong to be happy. She knows that Ned is innocent and that his confession is false. And to tie it all together, she knows that there's more to it because she doesn't see Ned die. Arya is understanding enough to know what she doesn't know, right? She knows, like, she doesn't get to see Ned's death. Therefore, she doesn't fully understand it. And who can understand that better than Arya, who can see everything else? So having this chapter through Arya's point of view tells us, the reader, that there is more to this story than what we've seen. And we, you and me, we, having seen the show and read the books further, know that that is in fact true. There is even more to this story than what we've been given already. We know there's a lot more going on with the behind the scenes of Jon Arryn and Lysa, right? And with Littlefinger. And we know that there's stuff going on with Dany and all of that. And so having Arya be our POV character here helps us understand that there is more to the story that we don't yet understand.
I love that analysis. I think that line just sums it all up. That's perfect.
Thank you. Yeah. I was like, because I was trying to figure out, I was like, what else could this mean? Why is the seeing stuff so present? And I think that's got to be it. And I love everything you broke down too. I think that helps me understand it, especially from like a story construction point of view. I think that all makes a lot of sense. But I was so excited to see all of it come together here and like in a beautiful little bow. It made me very happy.
I think I arrived at the same conclusion, but with less. I don't know. I don't think my work is as impressive.
I doubt
let's
that.
See. So
let's do it.
To jump back into what I was talking about of why Arya then and not Ned. The next question I arrived at was maybe Ned was kind of too far gone. I was really struck by the physical description of Ned here, where Arya says she's never seen him that thin. His legs all messed up, obviously, but even his the bandages dressing the wound are all messed up. And he's not like that in the show. Obviously, they didn't starve Sean Bean to death.
Right.
But you should picture that. Yeah. He's almost wraith-like, to go back to that undead thing from before.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I'm stress testing some of our theories here. How would it be that Ned is already too far gone? Is it because he's kind of gone further towards joining this narrative undead than Arya has? Because yes, she's anonymous and she's on the margins, but she's still, I don't know, bartering for pigeon.
Sure, she's still alive. Yeah, right.
She's coming up with little plans and schemes and clucking where the gold cloaks are.
Sure.
She's still moving and shaking. But we've talked about all of these just compounding deaths of Ned Stark so far in the novel. And he's taken so many losses. It's been L after L for Ned Stark. But then I instantly kind of hear the devil on the other shoulder say, like, well, just last chapter he was tortured again in this sensory deprivation dungeon.
Sure.
And he took another step back and he took another loss, and things somehow kept getting worse. So why is this chapter different? Why is a big event of this chapter one step too far? Is it just that we can't see this chapter from his POV because he dies? And that's where I think I dovetail with some of what you said there.
Okay.
Because the only way I can make sense of this, the only like last straw, the only new variable in this chapter is that confession. And I went back to my notes of that last Ned chapter, and I think that illuminated this a little bit more for me, because we were talking about how that chapter felt like a thematic reset for Ned's arc, for kind of the book as a whole, where we got back to what, even in the prologue, you and I were calling the central conflict of the book, the franchise, the series, and that was the living versus the dead. And we were also, I was going to dip my toe in the water of this rising spiritual element and interest of the story. And I think Ned, of all characters, making a false confession. Never mind that it's in front of two of his kids, but just that he's doing it publicly about the death of a friend, about all of these things that are red lines for him.
And he even said it explicitly in the last chapter. If I give this false confession, like, I'm as good as dead. Like, he is so morally against that idea.
Yes. I think Ned making a false confession in this way is kind of a formal expression of that thematic reset, of that spiritual element, where yes, he's attempting to save his family and protect them and sacrifice his own life and reputation to do so. It's obviously noble what he's doing. Yeah. But it does at a basic, fundamental level contradict and break his code and his moral center.
100%.
And I think that sacrifice, again, is noble, but it does break him.
Is counter to what he has always been. Yeah.
So maybe for the Ned that we know and have followed for, what was it, 11 or something chapters so far?
12 maybe, yeah. It was like 15. It was like 15. It was a lot. Yeah.
Maybe from a larger, zoomed out perspective, this false confession kind of destroys the thing that made him him. So you could argue that this chapter had to be either from Arya or Sansa's perspective, because there is no Ned left to go back to anymore.
I totally see what you mean. And I think we can even get, there's another narrative clue in the book that I think tells us that by this point, Ned is dead. And we've been talking about Ned being like effectively dead for a long time, but you're right that like, and yet he's still here, and yet he's still here. So why is this the final nail? In the last Dany chapter, if you remember, the one right before this, when Dany is looking into the tent with Mary Mazdur, the witch doctor lady, and Khal Drogo, Mary Mazdur says, "I'm like, the dead are going to come into this tent." And when Dany looks in, she sees different silhouettes, and one of the silhouettes she sees is of a giant wolf. And we speculated last week, maybe that's Ned. And so I think maybe that you could interpret that. I'm not saying this is the only way, but you could interpret that as a clue that Ned is already gone. And so that's another reason why we can't get him as a POV character here. And I think it ties to what you're saying. He's already gone because what he's decided to do is a fundamental breaking of and death of his character and who he is. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I mean, even as I say that, I can play the other side of it.
Sure.
And say there are other characters who undergo radical transformations that seem to break and contradict what is at the heart of them.
Sure.
Jaime will eventually, I believe, be a POV character, unless I'm completely
No, you're right, yeah.
But of course,
and
Jon,
that for a while, but yeah.
Jon as well. And I know at the end of the most recently published book, that's where Jon dies.
Yes.
So we don't know yet, but I imagine after he's resurrected in the Winds of Winter, he will continue to be a POV character.
Right. I would imagine it would be kind of weird if he wasn't.
But you think dying and coming back to life would sort of break a character.
Right.
If this guy lying would.
Sure.
So I don't know. I can see both sides of it. And I think the fun of this question for me is that there isn't a definitive answer to it. So opening it up to the audience, of course, what do you think? Why was this event told from Arya's indirect POV?
Yeah, right.
Because
she doesn't actually see it, but yeah.
And was Ned an option? I'm reminded of when we did an episode about Succession, talking about these kind of spiritual losses and defeats, and we called that the many deaths of Logan Roy.
That's right.
I think I might want to call this episode on YouTube the final death of Ned Stark.
Ooh, fun. Yeah, I think that's right, because he has died in many other ways several times. And I think one of the biggest things we kept coming back to through this journey of this book is, when is it too late for Ned? When does Ned die? When does Ned lose? And I think you can make an argument for every single Ned chapter that we read. Like, he keeps on losing. And even though often he does seem to be winning, it's not like he's bumbling through this book. He's making a lot of smart choices throughout, and you understand the choices he's made and the things he does. But you're right. It's just kind of like this repeated death, and this is the final one, and that's why we don't get to see it from his point of view.
Because this event has become sort of the calling card for the whole franchise, it's weird to say, but I think we were both kind of looking forward to this chapter.
Yeah.
But I found it so unpleasant to read, in a good way.
Yeah, it was really sad and shocking, and just upsetting, and
not
hard.
even talking about the actual decapitation. I think this is the most violent chapter. The way the crowd moves, the way all of these snapshot sort of vignettes of people that Arya just gets glimpses of. We get tiny little exchanges in dialogue. There's such a malevolence and a resentment and a self-interest. There's a real violent darkness to this chapter, and zoomed out from that event, it is a darkness cast over the entire world.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, and we get a lot of that from Arya's experience of the city. Like, we hear her recollect how she's like had stuff stolen. Almost all of her stuff has been stolen from her. And when she goes into these, like, basically poorhouses where she tries to get some food, she encounters some really, really scary people, and people who look at her really awfully and try to chase her down alleys. We hear about, she totally fucks up one of her fingers in the scramble at the Sept of Baelor, like rips her fingernail off and her hand is all bloody.
She almost gets run over by a cart from Lord of Red Wine or something.
And Sansa is up there screaming and crying. Like, it's an incredibly violent, tumultuous, dark chapter. And it's from the perspective of a 9-year-old girl. And I think you're right. It is a thesis statement about this story and this series, and it all is wrapped up in this little 10-page chapter.
And you're looking forward to it because it is this kind of juicy twist. It's an interesting thing to talk about. It's the ultimate water cooler moment, in the same way the Red Wedding is 2 books later.
Sure. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that, but also I know that it is deeply upsetting to read because I remember reading it for the first time.
Yeah, so good job, George.
Yeah, way to go, bud.
Still bringing the pain.
Yeah, really doing it. So we go back to Bran next week.
Okay, that should be light.
Another child who's having a real easy time.
Yeah.
But we're getting, so I mean, now that we've had this big moment, we're getting close to the end here. I mean, we got, I think, about 7 more after this, so we're getting near the end. Let us know what you thought of this chapter, of the questions we posed. Why is it Arya here and not Ned or Sansa? Because again, even though I feel excited about my theory and the things we discussed here, I'm always open to other interpretations, and I could be swayed in any direction. But otherwise, check out Cam's book. It's available via the description.
We've got bonus episodes on Patreon.
I was going to say, we have Patreon. Did you know that?
For normal episodes, this past Tuesday, we did an episode on Billions.
That's right,
which is it quietly became one of my favorite and most rewatched shows, but I never thought about it in the echelon of, we must do an episode.
Right.
So we did. And
we did.
I think that was a really fun discussion.
It was.
We also have bonus episodes over on the Patreon, our Breakfast Buffet Roundup series. We have our most recent one, I believe, would have been the Breakfast Buffet Oscar season roundup, talking about the brutalist nickel boys and a complete unknown. Oscar season is racing towards us.
Sure is. Also on Patreon, we did a whole series on Fire and Blood, which is the source material for the House of the Dragon show. So if you want more George R. R. Martin content, you can find a 12 or 13 part series over there. So check that out.
Yes. Thank you very much for supporting the Patreon, for supporting the show, for listening. And we'll
You almost made it to the end.
Tripping at the finish line.
Yeah, it's just like Ned.
And we'll be back here on Tuesday with another brand new episode.